There's a new war in the Middle East. Yes, that's right, ladies and gents, in the year that just keeps on giving, we've got another one on our hands. This time, it's around Yemen, where the Houthi rebels have steadily been expanding their campaign against their arch-nemesis to the north, Saudi Arabia. It started a little over a week ago, and back then it looked like it just might be another few tit-for-tat exchanges, but it has snowballed into something that we can no longer ignore. The Houthi rebels have declared a blockade of Saudi exports and followed it up with strikes on shipping and oil refineries alike, only to top things off the other day with the possibility of imposing tolls in a strait off their coast that's the third busiest on Earth. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? While this conflict is technically between the rebels and Riyadh and not directly part of the Iran war, there's really no such thing as a self-contained war in this part of the world. And that suggests things might be about to get a whole lot worse. Have you ever Googled yourself? Seriously, just type in your name, see what comes up. If you've got a common name, I don't know, maybe type in the city or town where you live. It's honestly surprising how many websites have your name, address, phone number, or other personal information just sitting there for anybody to find. Most of us never agree to that, but once it's online, it can be really hard to put it back in the box, and it can be used by scammers, identity thieves, or just complete strangers. Which is not really cool, and it's why I use Incogni. Incogni automatically contacts hundreds of data brokers and people search websites on your behalf to get your personal information removed. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out who has your data and filing endless removal forms, Incogni handles the whole process for you. And because your information can show back up over time, they continue monitoring and sending removal requests. As they put it, they can't harm you if they can't find you. What I really like is their unlimited plan with custom removals. If you Google yourself, you find a random website exposing your personal information that isn't part of their big stack of websites that they automatically do it for, you can simply copy that link into your Incogni dashboard. Their privacy specialist will then review it and work to get that information removed, even from many sites outside their normal automated removal network. It's a really simple way to take back control of your personal data. If you'd like to protect your online privacy, head to incogni.com/warfronts and use the code WarFronts to get 60% off an annual plan. That's incogni.com/warfronts with the code WarFronts. Thank you to Incogni for sponsoring this video, and now back to it. A new war. Now, despite all the news that's been flowing out of the Middle East this year, there's one country that's been more or less absent from the headlines: Yemen. A fragile ceasefire was reached between the internationally recognized Yemeni government, which is based in the eastern city of Aden, and the Ansar Allah Houthi rebels, who set up shop along the west coast back in 2022. To most international observers' surprise, it actually held. The two factions still hated each other, but for a country that had descended in the 2010s into a full-blown disaster of a civil war, it was welcome reprieve. So when the Iran war ignited back in February, there were concerns that it could spread to Yemen. The Houthi rebels are, after all, longtime allies of the Islamic Republic, so it wouldn't have been entirely surprising to see them join the fray on behalf of their buddies in Tehran. In the months that followed, they mostly stayed quiet, though. There were a few instances of them launching a ballistic missile here or a few drones there, usually directed at Israel, but let's be honest, with everything else that was flying across the Middle East skies at the time, this amounted to little more than a reminder that, guys, we're still here, hey! Lately, though, it seems like the Houthis want the limelight back, starting their own military campaign. It all seems to trace back to early July, when the group defied Saudi-led restrictions by inviting an Iranian delegation to visit Sana'a, in what was the first flight between the two countries in more than a decade. Houthi delegations had made a few trips to Tehran for the funeral of the late Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, with Iranian advisors traveling back the other way afterwards. On the 13th, as an aircraft returning from Tehran was on final approach to Sana'a, it was forced to divert after explosions destroyed a part of the airport. Yemen's internationally recognized government claimed responsibility for the strike, defending the move as their attempt to prevent an unauthorized Iranian flight from landing. The Houthis, for their part, pointed the finger at Saudi Arabia. That dispute still hasn't been settled, but what is clear is why the plane landing there would have been such a problem. According to a report from Reuters citing sources in both Tehran and Aden, as many as 21 IRGC personnel had been on that plane, along with the returning Houthi delegation. It was ultimately able to land somewhere else in Yemen, but it was game on regardless. The Houthi rebels responded by launching a combination of missiles and drones at Abha International Airport across the border. And while Saudi state media said it was able to successfully intercept that volley, it's hard to see how they can let such an attack stand. Whether or not all of this results in a return to war between Riyadh and Sana'a, isn't certain, but it is certainly leaning in that direction. Alison Miner, a Middle East policy expert at the Atlantic Council, went on record as saying, quote, "I think we're very close to a resumption of all-out war. I'm not seeing an off-ramp right now." The interesting and perhaps alarming part of this is the role that the Houthis play in the region. Back when the Iran war began, there was understandable worry that the Houthis might leap in to defend their allies in Tehran, but that didn't come to pass. Unlike groups who did go down the self-sacrifice route for Iran, we're looking at you, Hezbollah, the Houthis have always operated far more independently. Friendly with Tehran? Yeah, sure, but ultimately unwilling to dive headfirst into a war that they aren't sure they can win. That makes their entry now significantly more concerning because what they've done is watch Iran hold Hormuz hostage with a combination of missiles and drones and conclude, we could do that too. And that sucks for a world that is already dealing with the closure of Hormuz. Because the Houthis are not just sitting alongside any old waterway, but one of the most important in the world. One exit left. When it comes to narrow choke points of water in the Middle East, the Strait of Hormuz is naturally what's going to come to mind before anything else. And for good reason too. Iran's ability to hold Washington, and by extension the international community, hostage over the issue has dominated headlines for months. But for those wanting to get oil out of the Middle East by boat, Hormuz is actually not the only option. There are two others, though they're smaller and not accessible to all of the Gulf states. Both empty out from the Arabian Peninsula's west coast, one being the Suez Canal to the north, which leads into the Mediterranean Sea, and the other is the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which gets you into the Indian Ocean by way of the Gulf of Aden. Suez is solely under control of the Egyptian government, which has no intention of shaking the status quo, since it's a great little money spinner. The Bab el-Mandeb, however, is a narrow body of water between the coasts of Djibouti and, you guessed it, Houthi-controlled Yemen. Anyone who followed the Gaza war will likely be able to guess where this one is headed, because these guys ran a similar playbook 3 years ago. Starting in November 2023, the Houthis began firing on commercial vessels they alleged were Israeli-linked in solidarity with the Palestinian cause, opening by boarding the carrier Galaxy Leader and eventually sinking 4 separate ships off their coast. The US and the UK launched a joint operation aimed at stopping the attacks, but only had limited success. The rebels kept firing until a ceasefire was reached between Israel and Hamas late last year. Traffic has not returned to where it was pre-2023. For all of the Iran war, though, Bab el-Mandeb has remained open for transit. This has been to the chagrin of Tehran, which has repeatedly threatened to have the Houthis close it in a Hormuz-like fashion, only to have Sana'a be like, "Nah, we're good, bro." Unfortunately, that now appears to be a thing of the past. Back on July the 20th, the Houthis announced that they would be implementing a blockade on all shipping from Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the United States as part of the escalating war. They made good on their threat within 2 days. On July the 22nd, they hit the vessel Ensilia off the southern Saudi city of Jizan, as well as claiming to have struck the Layla in a similar region. At least one more Saudi-linked ship was struck over the following week, the most recent at the time of recording being the NCC Ghazal on July the 28th. Alongside the tankers, the missiles started landing at Saudi ports themselves. US-designed Patriot interceptor batteries brought down at least 2 ballistic missiles aimed at the port city of Yanbu, while the refinery closer to the border with Yemen at Jazan took direct hits. Riyadh hasn't said what actually got through. But whatever it was, it did enough damage that they had to shut down the refinery entirely and pull 400,000 barrels of oil a day of production offline. 400,000 barrels is not a small amount, especially given the global energy crisis as a result of what's going on in Hormuz. But realistically, if Riyadh had to choose which one they'd rather lose, it'd be Jazan any day. Yanbu is not an ordinary city for the kingdom. It's the endpoint of the 750-mile pipeline running clear across the country from the oil fields on the Gulf Coast, which is what lets them bypass Hormuz at all. They've been running the thing at absolute maximum capacity for months, taking it from a pre-war baseline of roughly 1 million barrels of oil per day all the way to nearly 5 million. Data from Kepler shows that Yanbu accounted for 92% of all Saudi seaborne crude exports as of June, so when it comes to this city, it is all or nothing. At least at the time of recording, there is still traffic flowing through the Bab el-Mandeb, but it's already starting to show signs of strain. According to a report in the Wall Street Journal, at least 4 tankers carrying Saudi crude have turned around before reaching the strait and reversed course to head north to the Suez Canal, where seaborne oil transit is running at its highest volume in years. The route through Suez can only alleviate so much, though. For starters, sailing through Suez is not guaranteed. The Houthis being able to hit the city of Yanbu itself would risk shutting down Riyadh's export abilities at the source. And even if Patriot interceptors are able to keep the city safe, there's still the pipeline that runs, across the entire country that's just sitting there, waiting for whatever Yemen might throw at it. Shooting aside for a moment, though, the man-made Suez has physical limits that make it a poor substitute for natural bodies of water. It's too shallow to take on a fully loaded supertanker, so the industry built an entire class of ship which can fit through it carrying 1 million or so barrels, which they so creatively named the Suezmax. That's only half of what the regular tankers can carry, so right off the bat, there are going to be issues. Even if you could double down on Suezmaxing, though, it doesn't change the geography going on here. Ships take the Bab el-Mandeb to reach Africa and Asia, which sits south and east of it. Suez sends them northwest. A trip from Yanbu to Eastern Asia that normally takes 16 days would now mean crossing the Mediterranean and going the long way around Africa, stretching the whole thing to around 50 days. And that is the part that turns a Saudi problem into everyone's problem. And while Riyadh might not have imagined 2026 playing out like this, they recognize the threat this poses to them and are already taking measures to shore up a coalition to keep traffic flowing as best as possible. Saudi Arabia is hiring. Now, the thing about all of this is that, realistically speaking, Saudi Arabia would almost certainly rather be doing anything other than discussing their neighbor to the south again. They haven't exactly had a great relationship in years gone by. Even before the civil war broke out, they were well underway to building a giant wall to seal off the entirety of the Yemeni border. Build that wall. Blast from the past. Once fighting did break out, they launched a military operation to restore the internationally recognized government to power across the entirety of Yemen, expecting it to last a matter of weeks. As is pretty much the eternal case when it comes to the Middle East, though, you can fast forward by years and the fighting is still going on. The Saudis were sincerely hoping that the 2022 peace deal would allow Riyadh to finally close the lid on that chapter of Middle East misadventures, because they had quite an ambitious plan they were far more interested in anyway. Vision 2030, which Mohammed bin Salman announced back in 2016, was aimed at fundamentally transforming a kingdom that had long been an odd mix of extreme oil wealth and an underdeveloped, ultra-conservative Islamic society. The idea was to spend the oil money to supercharge their economy into something that would no longer run on their liquid gold, and ultimately usher in tourism, stadiums, overpaid comedians flying out to cash the biggest paycheck of their lifetimes, and, of course, foreign investment. None of this was ever going to get very far, with Houthi missiles and drones coming down on various infrastructure on even a semi-regular basis, as they had been for years before the 2022 peace deal, including a now infamous strike on an Aramco fuel depot in the city of Jeddah that went up in flames just 1 week before the ceasefire took hold. That reluctance to return to all-out war has not changed today, but Riyadh is increasingly finding itself with limited options. Because just when you thought this couldn't get any worse, Reuters reported this week that the Houthis are thinking about implementing their own transit fees on all commercial shipping moving through the southern Red Sea. Well, all except for China, which asked for and repeatedly received a special carve-out, so that's nice for them. Those 20 or so Iranian advisors that the government in Aden is trying to stop from landing in Sana'a, by the way, weren't visiting there on holiday, as beautiful as the Yemeni coastline may be. No. According to the same Reuters report, they were actually in Yemen to help the Houthis get this toll booth set up in the first place. Keep in mind, the Islamic Republic created what it calls the Persian Gulf Strait Authority back in May, specifically to collect tolls for ships crossing Hormuz. They pitched the idea as them providing a service, but given that what vessels are actually paying for is just assurance that Iran won't fire on them, it's more of a mob-style shakedown, isn't it? Nonetheless, the hardliners in Tehran have become the go-to guys on how to get such a wheeze started. This may have been the tipping point for Saudi Arabia, which the Houthis can only push so far before they get some sort of response beyond a limited tit-for-tat airstrike. On Wednesday, Al Monitor broke the exclusive story that Riyadh had been assembling a massive international force designed to keep shipping through the Bab el-Mandeb open and free of tolls, fees, or services that the Houthis might be inclined to sell to you. There are at least 50 separate countries who have been invited, and at least at the time of recording, Egypt, Sudan, Somalia, and Djibouti, which sits just opposite Yemen on the waterway, have all signed on to the coalition. Pakistan and Turkey have both received invites as well and are reportedly still mulling over whether to join. But given the already deepening relationship between the two and Saudi Arabia, we wouldn't be surprised to see them sign on too. Several European countries, meanwhile, including France and Italy, are reportedly waiting to see if the US enters the coalition before publicly announcing themselves. Washington is historically hesitant to join supranational coalitions where it would not be running the show. This would be one based out of Riyadh, so there's genuine uncertainty as to how all of that would work out. But given the way things are going in Hormuz, and reports coming in that the US Navy is stretched thin, this very well could be a moment where the White House says, "You know what? You take this one." Where that ultimately goes is anybody's guess. But the way things are looking, there's likely going to be another conflict in the Middle East that we'll be keeping you updated on regularly. And combined with the issues in Hormuz, this one has the potential to wreak economic carnage across much of the world. Thank you for watching.